We took our first rest at the Garrigdhu, the Black Dyke, a mile from home. And then we went past the Cowber, where the Yoruba folk spent the summer. To your left, you could see Adin and Grugan and Shellistoter between you and the shore. The shillings of the folk from Fivepenny and Knockbeard. Another breather at the Beher, 2 miles on your journey. And finally, we would arrive at Sorachanawati, near Adi of Yali, halfway to Gibatal. Now, Gibatal was their destination. So there are so many place names involved there. Gaelic ones, Old Norse ones, and so on. We would have some food there, and the cattle would be very happy eating the fresh grass. It was the Lionel folk who were at Adi of Yali, and down the Cuish at their glen were the Phyllis Glacier shillings for the folk from the north end of the district. There was a small church there on the very edge of a steep cliff, which had been built by John Nicholson, a Baptist who had come back home from America. Many of the people who were on the moor came there on Sunday. A short distance further out beyond Skipagary was Adi Namoyim, and there was a spring there from which people drank, as they believed that it was good for this and that. It was full of iron. So that's lots of place names in that little extract.
We got a project through to employ young people to go around the community with a tape recorder, going to the doors of older people, Gaelic-speaking older people, and recording them. And then coming back to a base we had for them and transcribing the stories and translating them. And a lot of that is the basis of this book and another book that we produced about the First World War.
Now, there was quite an important project going on here in 2003. It was called the Donation Project. It was about place names. And the interviews conducted during that time, I suppose, forms the basis of the book. A lot of the people who are interviewed have passed on since then. And if we hadn't published the book, a lot of the place names would have gone out of use, would have disappeared. So we're very, very, very proud.
This is a quote from Brendan Moohan, who was a miner who grew up in Musselburgh in East Lothian, and he described his life growing up in a mining community. He said, "The Miners' Club again, the other kind of socialistic element to it was in your community. You're going to celebrate your community, and we're going to have this gala day every year. The high point of the year in the summer, and we'll have all these kind of sporting events, all that kind of stuff. It would all centre around the club, but it's something whereby the community celebrated itself. Whereas nowadays, people are more recipient of things to celebrate, i.e. they'll watch the World Cup, they'll celebrate whoever wins, the Olympics, something they'd put on their TV screens. Whereas in those events you had all ages having their races, their singing competitions, their boxing competitions. The garden competition was often judged then. So there was a variety of things, and it was celebrating no further than the boundaries of the village. It was pretty good." It's a massive privilege to be shortlisted for Scotland's National Book Awards. I hope and think it's primarily a testimony to the importance of the experiences that Coal Country discusses. Deindustrialization was the formative economic and political experience in Scotland over the second half of the 20th century, and the most powerful words in Coal Country aren't my own, they're words I recorded in homes and community centres across Lanarkshire and the other coalfields of Scotland, and I think the nomination is testament to the power and enduring significance of those experiences, especially in our current context of a deliberation over achieving economic and social as well as environmental justice in our current energy transition.
We are absolutely thrilled that we've been shortlisted for a Saltire Society Book of the Year award. It was the late and much missed Jenny Wormold who first came to me about this project. And in our discussions about what we wanted the book to do, we settled on some clear themes. Most of all, we wanted to convey how exciting this period is, especially to people who might not know it very well. We wanted to demonstrate the importance of understanding this period for contemporary debates about the Anglo-Scottish relationship and about the future of the British Union. But we also wanted to convey what an outward-looking society early modern Scotland was. When Janay and I sat down to start planning the book, we wanted to open with a good story that would convey the importance of some of these bigger issues. And we decided to tell the story of the Clarks of Pennycook. The Clarks still live in Scotland, they are still baronets of Pennycook, and we have to thank Sir Robert Clark of Pennycook for allowing us to publish from his family's amazing archive. The reason we wanted to talk about the Clarks is because in the 17th and into the early 18th century, that family had moved from being middle ranking and of limited distinction to being at a central place in social and intellectual life of their country. And what struck us was that although the Clarks remain mostly in Scotland, cosmopolitanism is their hallmark. An earlier generation make their money buying and selling in Europe. They have connections to London, but they're also part of the opening up of the British Atlantic. And that, to me, suggested something straightforward but important about this period. Europe and England were not an either or for 17th century Scots. The two were interconnected.
It is an absolute delight to be nominated for Scotland's National Book Award. For Laura and I both, early modern Scotland is an area of great interest, great passion, and to be able to write a book which looks at a comprehensive history of this time period was in and of itself an honor, and now to be recognized for that is even more exciting. There are a whole variety of things that have really drawn us to this book. And one of the things that I would like to talk about right now is the interest that we both had and the importance that we felt in making sure that a history of Scotland that looks at this long expanse includes the voices of those who are often silent in general histories such as this. And those are women, young people, and those who are further down the socioeconomic scale. These are the people who lived in these large-scale historical processes that were happening during this time. They're also the individuals who did shape how these things would look, how they would evolve, and what essentially the history of Scotland was going to look like.
Well, this is my first single author book, and in all honesty, I found it a real challenge to bring the book to completion. And I've certainly benefited a lot from the support of colleagues, the publisher, family and friends. And I'd really like to thank the Saltire Society very much for this nomination. I've long been interested in the Northumbrian kingdom, from its heyday in the 7th century to its decline in the 10th and 11th centuries. I've also been learning Gaelic since I was a teenager, and in the book I combined these two interests. I think one aspect of the subject that would be familiar to some people is the connection between Iona and Lindisfarne, and certainly I was and I am inspired by that aspect of the history. But what surprised me was how the disintegration of the Northumbrian kingdom led to other types of Gaelic influence. And we see that, for example, in place names around the Solway Firth.
Little more than a generation ago, most Scottish school children still learned a little at primary school about the king who revolutionised 12th century Scotland. David I was the king who introduced feudalism, who began the development of the sheriffdoms and shires that were still a feature of the contemporary map of Scotland's local government structures, who introduced French and English monks in an effort to make Scotland more religious and more civilised, and converted certain villages into royal boroughs to encourage the development of industry and trade. In the final judgment, David I made Scotland a more advanced country and gave it a pattern of life which was to last for 400 years. It was a simple, if not simplistic, message, but one which managed to summarize the achievement of the Davidian Revolution and present it in the language of the brave new world of post-World War II Scotland in terms of its then current engagement in Harold Wilson's white heat of the technological revolution that was forging a new Britain. David was a modernizer, an innovator, a revolutionary who dragged Scotland from the ignorance and darkness of suspicion and thrust it into the brilliant light of modernity. I've been fascinated by David since I was a kid, really. My aunt, when I was probably about 6 or 7, got the book, The History for Young Scots. And in it, he was this king who, as that extract says, was just presented as somebody who hit Scotland like a whirlwind and dragged it kicking and screaming from barbarity into modernity. And ever since that time, I'd wanted to know more about him. And despite the fact that he's up there as this great icon, there was actually very, very little extended and coherent discussion of the king or his reign. It is actually genuinely a huge honour to be shortlisted. And even if I don't win, the fact that I'm recognised on a shortlist by my peers, it means an immense amount to me. To be up there, being considered alongside other major works, but also to be, if you like, part of that continuity over decades of the Scottish History Book of the Year, and some of the really, really great winners of that in the past. It's just, as I say, an honour to be included amongst them.
The Stuarts had a long, illustrious Scottish lineage stretching back to 1371, but they and the clothing style they gave their name to during the 17th century are usually studied within a British or English context. This book takes a different viewpoint, hence the use of Scottish and English rather than British, thereby reasserting the Scottish dimension, both of the Stuarts and their subjects from north of the border, into the familiar Stuart fashion narrative. As such, it is located within the cultural turn of Scottish and dress history and addresses the simple fact that to date, there have been no detailed studies of later Stuart male royal clothing or fashionable 17th century male Scottish dress. It also follows in the footsteps of Sharon Adams and Julian Goodair's Scotland in the Age of Two Revolutions by focusing on a long 17th century and by exploring, I quote, the history that the Scots themselves made.
I suppose it means two things, really. I suppose on a personal level, it's an amazing honour and something I'd never expected, especially as this was my first venture into Scottish history. I've done no Scottish history before. And so having the chance to explore such a rich, exciting topic was absolutely fascinating, both in terms of engaging with the archival material, the language, the spelling, all of those things, so different, but absolutely central to the whole sort of research experience. And on a bigger level, it is so exciting and refreshing that the Society has nominated a book that looks at clothing and dress history. It often isn't regarded as mainstream history, but it has a lot to say about a country's history and its past. And Scotland has a hugely rich textile and dress history. And so I'm very excited that that this book is on the list, and I'm sure it'll be up there with the sort of the big political and religious histories of Scotland and key individuals. But it's nice to see that material culture and clothing is recognised in this nomination.